Hi everyone, my name is Natalie Ledwell and this is The Inspiration Show. Today in the show, I'm actually really looking forward to doing this show today because the subject is all about the story of our life and the story that we tell ourselves. And today I have author Kim Schneiderman with me today. How are you, Kim?
Good, thank you.
Such a pleasure to have you here, and I can't wait to get into the nuts and bolts of what we'll be talking about today, because I do believe that the stories that we talk about our lives and the versions that we choose really does help to change the way that we move forward in our life and the success that we have. But before we get into that, why don't we start a little bit with your story? Like what is it, what is your background and what was the motivation behind writing this book?
Sure. Well, right now I work as a psychotherapist in Manhattan, but I started my career as a writer, actually as a journalist, where I was actually eliciting and telling people stories. And the inspiration for this book was sort of it was a combination of many things. I mean, as a child, I was a very imaginative child. I had I had my nose in a book, and I kind of envisioned myself as a character in a story. And as I matured, that sort of idea of being a character in the story would come up when I was in situations where I felt really challenged. I would ask myself, well, if I were reading about this in a novel or watching it on a film, what would I want to happen? What actions would I root for, or why might an author even place this situation in a story, and what would it, what might it be teaching the protagonist of my narrative? And so that kind of perspective, combined with my therapeutic background and my interest in storytelling and being a writer, kind of led to me creating a series of workshops in 2008 for people who had been impacted by the recession to help them reframe their stories and reclaim their narratives.
Absolutely. Yeah, it was an interesting time, 2008, and the consequential times from that. Very interesting. Yeah. So, all right, so let's talk about so your story in particular. So when we're talking about storytelling, and your book's called Step Out of Your Story, are you talking about looking back on previous events and then creating or choosing a version of the story that's more empowering?
I'm actually not. I'm not focused on the past. I'm actually focused on the present. And the reason,
right.
In fact, one of the first exercises that I ask people to do is to imagine that your life is a novel and identify, name and describe the current chapter, right? And so what that does, it sort of bookends a period of time in your life and allows you to really explore it, to identify the themes, to identify your supporting characters, to identify your antagonists, and kind of come to see how all the elements of your story are conspiring to help you grow. And the reason I choose the current chapter is because the current chapter is where the protagonist of your story has an opportunity to change his or her story.
Right?
So that's why I ask people to start with the present. There is some reflection on the past, but really the focus is on kind of like getting out of the places where you're stuck, the same old stories where you get stuck. So there's an opportunity to look at how you can reframe what's facing you right now.
Exactly. Because that's the thing, when we're stuck in that negative story, and of course 2008 would have been, that story of, losing everything, everything going bad. When we stay in that negative spiral, then all we see is this, and we keep telling the story and by doing that, what we're doing is we're creating the present moment over and over and over again.
Right.
So what you're saying is to sit down and actually be very purposeful in deciding what the outcome is that you want it to be, and so do you get people to write this out as a story? Is it like they're writing a novel?
To a degree. The idea is to walk people through their story.
Yeah.
So, right. So the premise of the book is that every life is an unfolding story, a unique, unpredictable, potentially heroic story that's open to interpretation, especially your own, and that people usually understand that intuitively, but until something happens, we often don't really take the time to step out of our stories and ask ourselves, like, who is this character playing? What is my story about? Who's writing my script? And how can the challenges that are facing me help me develop the tools and insights and strengths to move to the next chapter? So what I do is I provide, and the reason it can be hard to do that is because it's hard to, sometimes to really get that objectivity from our own story. So what I do is I provide tools and a framework to help people get some emotional distance from their story so they can look at it a little bit more objectively. And then I help them also by reframing life, not necessarily as this, not as an opportunity to, well, I help them reframe their life to see it as a personal growth adventure, so that whatever challenge that shows up in their plot line, they can view it as an opportunity to actually transform their character, to build, to become more authentic, more compassionate, more courageous, more evolved versions of themselves. And when you look at, and if you look at life that way, whatever is happening to you is an opportunity for you to grow. And that really is how you reframe your story. Because sometimes, people want these affirmations that will like quickly, change how they look at things, and those can be very helpful. But I also think that really being able to change how you see life, to be able to take that a step further. And my exercises help people step out of their story by, for one, I ask people to write in the third person perspective, in the third person narrative.
Yeah.
And that's actually based on a growing body of research that shows that when people view themselves in the third person, they tend to see themselves through more compassionate eyes.
Yeah.
So, and because it creates some psychological, emotional distance. So you're not like, you're kind of like fooling your ego into thinking that you're writing about somebody else when you're writing about yourself.
Yeah.
And
no, exactly, because that's the thing. Like you hit the nail on the head. You need to emotionally distance yourself enough to be able to be outside of the situation, so that you can see it for the situation that it is, the components that it is, rather than being emotionally attached to the negative side of it.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. That's exactly.
Yeah. So okay. So this is awesome. And what you're also doing is helping people see the gift in what's happening right now.
Absolutely.
Sometimes we don't get to see that until like further down the track. I know when I'm going through challenging times, I have this little thing that I say to myself, because I have a platform like here and I speak on stage, I'm like, oh my God, this is going to be such a great story when I tell this later. When I get to the other side of it, I'm like, this is
right. You naturally have that perspective.
Exactly, because that's the thing. You've got to make the story interesting. So it's like, this is just going to be one of those interesting parts of the story, but then you raise above, and yeah.
But part of that is also being able to value character development. Like oftentimes when we watch a movie or we read a book, we really understand that the things that show up in the plot line are the character is going to be challenged in some way, and how he or she responds to those challenges determines the degree to which they evolve or don't evolve, really. And so if we can look at ourselves in that way, then we have an opportunity to say, this is an opportunity for me to change something about myself. Maybe whenever I have these recurring characters that show up in my story, like the bullies that keep showing up, right? They're the antagonists of my story. And every time that this bully shows up, I get scared and I don't say, but I'm very passive. So by looking at your life as a story, you can stop and think to yourself, you know what? This story isn't working for me. Instead of looking at it that way, what I want to see this, like, what would I want the character of my story to do instead? Well, I'd like her to stand up for herself. I'd like her to express what's in her heart, what's in her mind, and not be afraid. And so what my book does is it provides opportunities for people to play with that idea very creatively through writing exercises, to envision these conversations, to dialogue with the parts of themselves that are courageous, to get in touch with those voices.
Yeah. So it sounds like it's like a two-parter. You kind of, number one, getting them to acknowledge the situation,
Yeah.
but from an emotional distance. But
Mhm.
then to choose the choices or choose the direction in which the story goes.
Right, right. So
Yeah,
it's changing your story by changing your voice and your through voice and choice, really.
yeah.
And yes, exactly.
Excellent.
Exactly.
So tell me about how this has really played out with your personal story. Like how has this played with your life story?
Sure. So, interestingly enough, I told you like I was an imaginative kid. I had this perspective. I created these workshops, and what happened about 3 years ago? I really had to ask myself, like, could I walk my own talk? I really part of the one of the ideas behind the exercise is that you can find the redemptive sort of silver lining narrative in any opportunity, anything that's facing you.
Yeah.
And so 3 years ago, my father was diagnosed with cancer. And it was the second cancer diagnosis in 10 years. My mother had died like 7 years ago from ovarian cancer. And I was really devastated at the time. And my father and I, he had been the antagonist of my childhood story, it was really an opportunity for me to get to know him better. And then when he got diagnosed, I was just like, oh my God, like, how am I going to get through this? And I ended up, um, you know, taking a temporary leave of absence from my private practice in Manhattan and temporarily relocating to Florida to be his hospice caregiver. And during that time, it was one of the hardest, like, experiences that I ever went through, like just taking care of him and going through that process with him. But it was an opportunity for us to really get to know each other's hearts and minds on a much deeper level. And to the point where a few weeks before he died, he said that he couldn't believe that at the end of his life that he was still learning and growing. And I said, what are you learning? And he said that people have found a way to love me and that I found a way to love them. And that really stayed with me, and that whole experience has changed my story about my father. But also, it's when I tell it as a story of redemption. The prodigal daughter, um, and there are many. Like, one of the things I emphasize in the book, there's many different ways to tell your story, and especially to tell it to yourself. And we can tell sometimes, depending on how we choose to use our power of interpretation, about what happens in the text of our lives. The text being, if our life is a story, what happens is in the text. How we choose to interpret that interprets how we feel about our story, and how we feel about our story influences how it unfolds. So choosing to read that chapter in my life, that very difficult chapter, as a redemptive story, as a story of healing, has really transformed me and how I relate to the world. And someone could easily say, well, that's a really sad story. Too bad that you guys had this great relationship, developed this really great relationship right before he died. And that's one way to read it. But but I think that I could, I would get stuck there.
Yeah.
And so there is a choice involved. And then again, I really felt like I had an opportunity to apply these ideas to my own story, and it really worked.
Yeah. So it sounds like there's really no story, or there's no situation where this methodology could apply to.
I would like to say that. I'm not sure that that's true. I think there are some things that, like tragedies and, on a grand scale, traumas, that it might be hard, like, to do that with. I don't know, but I
Mm-hmm.
look at, like, but then again, you look at people like Nelson Mandela, people who've been in prison, people who've gone through all kinds of extreme situations, and you've got to wonder that you've got to imagine that they use this idea, that they were able to see the larger narrative of their own lives.
Yeah.
You've got to, that they were able to find meaning, which is what this is all about, that they were able to find meaning in their story. So I don't know that I could do what Nelson Mandela did, but there's not, but I imagine if Nelson Mandela could do it, there are other people who could do it too.
And that's the thing, I think, with all of us, our story, regardless of what the situation is, I mean, I don't think there is varying levels, because to us, it's our story and we're in it. And maybe there are some of us that are suffering or feeling the same amount of challenge that Nelson Mandela did. It's a completely different situation, but it's our situation. So yeah, Kim, darling, it's been awesome talking to you today. I knew that this was going to be a great show because I'm so like I so get this, and I agree, and I think not just looking at our initial like our chapter now. I also there's like 20 different versions. There's an infinite amount of versions to a story, and when we can be purposeful in the version that we choose, they're all right, they're all true. But we can use our own truth, which is awesome. So, so where can we send people if they want to connect with you or purchase the book or work with you? Where can we send them?
Sure. They can go to stepoutofyourstory.com, which is my website, which has links to Amazon and Barnes & Noble and New World Library, which is my publisher.
Yep.
Where they can purchase the book. They can also like my Facebook page, which is Step Out of Your Story. I will be doing a Step Out of Your Story writing workshop at the JCC of Manhattan, October 25th. And I will be doing a book signing in Florida in Coral Gables at Books and Books on, November 8th. So,
wonderful. Yeah. Awesome. And guys, remember, if you just click on the banner to the side, you'll go straight through to Kim's website from there as well. So thank you for that. So, and guys, I encourage you to share this video, get the word out. You can do that by clicking the Facebook and the Twitter share buttons on this page. And make sure you leave your email if you haven't done so already, so we can send you the Manifesting with the Masters video e-course. So until next time, remember to live large, choose courageously, and love without limits. We'll see you soon.
Okay.